Hello, Carlos. Good evening. Good evening, Carolina. All right. We're going to wait for a couple of minutes until everybody gets into. Okay, and we're going to begin later. Okay. All right. I'm sorry. I don't know what happened, but okay. Okay. So as I was saying, good evening to all of you. Tonight we're going to continue them with our learning of the TOEFL exam, and now we are getting into a new section that is the reading section, and this is a very interesting and didactic section of this exam in particular. I remind that when I was practicing in order to take my own exam in 2021, I always had a lot of fun when practicing this section because it somehow offered me something different all the time, because somehow some sections of this exam are a little bit exhausting and boring sometimes to practice, especially the writing section. But the reading section is always refreshing because it offers you, I think, a lot of new content, and you're always going to you're always going to learn something new, actually. Okay, so before we begin, I please remind all of you, dear students, that you have to have your cameras on, so that, well, you know, part of executive English is that we really want you to retain everything that I am teaching you, and well, we believe that by having your cameras on, we can make sure of that. Okay, so we are going to begin them, and now we are going to look at some slides that I have prepared for you, a presentation that helps you enjoy, okay? So let's begin. So the general aspects of this session in particular, okay? This section is super interesting, as I was saying, and the reading section is basically designed to assess how well you can read and understand the kind of materials used in a academic environment. Okay, so remind that the TOEFL exam is different from other standardized tests and examinations because with the TOEFL, the people who are reviewing your performance in this exam are going to be able to know what type of performance you have in academic topics, okay? The type of materials and the type of passages that you're going to receive in the reading section are always going to be about science, are always going to be about social sciences, art, basically everything that you could find in a university setting, okay? So what you're going to always keep in mind while doing this is that you are always going to receive that type of material, okay? And that is great because when people is assessing your curriculum, people is assessing your score, they are always going to know how well you can perform in that setting. And even if you are trying to take the TOEFL exam to apply to a job in a international enterprise or company, they are always going to value that as well because you know that part of the academic environment or the part of the academic material also involves a very profound understanding of some terminology that is advanced and it's complicated. So that is always very much value when people are reviewing your profile. Okay, so now this section includes 3 or 4 reading passages, each approximately 700 words long. That if you translate that into, let us say, a book, or of how would this 700 words look like in a book, it's more or less 2 or 3 pages, okay? So it's a considerable amount of words. Nevertheless, I think it's not going to be a problem, especially depending on the technique that you're going to use to approach this section, okay? But we're going to talk about that later. So you're going to have 10 questions per passage, and you will have 54 minutes up to 72 minutes to answer all the questions in the section, okay? So from 54 to 72 minutes to answer all the questions in this section. And this is basically translated into 18 minutes per passage in order to complete everything, that is to say, to read and to respond to your questions, or following the technique that you use to respond to your questions. But the change or the variation here between 54 minutes and 72 minutes is because, as I have explained, of the experimental passage that you maybe are going to receive. It's possible, though it's not certain. Maybe you're going to receive an extra passage or an extra set of questions that are going to ask you, of course, about a reading, right? And that reading, if you receive it, that is an extra reading, it's only going to help ETS to know if the questions that they are preparing and the way they are organizing their exam, the way that they are organizing their exam is appropriate, is accurate, well, it's able to adequately measure to adequately measure the capacity of each student in order to respond to these specific passages, okay? But if you receive this experimental section, you're actually not going to have any effect on your score, okay? So if you receive this extra set of questions and extra passage, this is not going to affect your general score in any sense, okay? So if you receive it, you just do it, but normally you're going to have 54 minutes in order to complete all your 3 passages, and you're going to have because of that 18 minutes in order to respond each passage, okay? So don't worry if you're not familiar with the topic of a passage. All the information you need to answer the questions will be included in the passage, okay? This is very important because maybe you're afraid that if you are not somebody who is very familiarized, for example, with biology, and you receive a passage about biology, you are going to be experimenting a lot of problems and troubles because maybe because maybe you are not really acquainted with biology, right? Maybe you were very bad at biology when you were in high school or something. But the point is here that you have no necessity to worry about that because everything you are going to receive in your passage is everything you are going to need to respond to questions. Okay, so they are not going to ask you about super advanced things in biology that are not in the passage. If they are asking you about something complicated, their response is in the passage. Okay, so don't worry about that. And there is even a glossary actually feature available to define words not commonly used if you need it. But these are just endemic words, I clarify, okay? So it's not like you have the opportunity to go to that glossary every single time you do not understand a advanced or fancy word. They are expecting you to know those type of words, but endemic words, as for example, chaman, right? That chaman is not a word that everybody knows depending on your country, but chaman is a kind of magician, right? In Peru or Bolivia. So basically, if you do not know what chaman is, they are going to make sure to include a glossary explaining those type of endemic words, okay? But for any other type of terminology, you're required to understand it, to know what it means, or if you're not able to know what it means exactly, through the context, you're going to have a general idea, right? But those are the general aspects. Now, we're going to be looking at what the types of questions you are going to receive in this specific section so that you are, well, familiarized beforehand when you are responding or practicing for this section. And it's important for you to know more or less what is the criteria for each question to consider when you want to respond, right? When you want to make sure that you are choosing the right answer. Now, what do I want to say now? Before we get into the questions, I just want to suggest a method or a strategy for you to approach this section because there are a lot of strategies. Maybe your professor tomorrow is going to give you several other options for you to approach this exam, but I'm going to suggest you this one, okay? I'm going to suggest the CHARS strategy to approach this section. It's super easy, and I think that if you think about it, you are going to get convinced of it. Now, how to approach this section through the CHARS method. Following this strategy, what you're going to do once receiving your passages is to go directly to the first question and use the passage to respond. You are not going to read your whole passage first. Once you respond, you move on to the next question, look at your question, respond using the passage, and repeat the process until your last question. This way, you are going to use your passage merely as a means to get over your questions and not vice versa, okay? What I'm trying to suggest here is that there are many people who thinking that it is going to help them somehow or is going to be more beneficial, when they receive their passage and when they receive their questions, what they do is to read the entire passage first with those 700 words, and later when they have finished to read the entire passage, at that point, they move on to the questions and they try to respond. So in order to give you a glance of it, if you have 18 minutes to respond all the questions about that passage, people basically spend 10 minutes reading the passage and later they just reserve for them like 8 minutes in order to respond to the questions through the information they have managed to collect in their reading, okay? But that strategy is, I think it's not very much convenient because you are using so much time in your passage. You are focusing so much in your passage that you are actually forgetting that your objective here is not to really grasp every single detail of your passage, but what you are actually required to do and what you want to do is to respond to the questions correctly. In order to do that, you do not need to grasp every single thing of your paragraph, and not even you need to be a specialist about your paragraph and to read it in a way in which finalizing all the tests, you could say, for example, now I am an expert about the field that I have read about because I pay attention very much to the paragraph and I understood it completely. No, I think that is not your objective, right? Your aim here is just to respond to the questions correctly. So you can do this. You can just receive your paragraph, receive your questions, go directly to the questions without having read your passage and respond. Okay, first question, and you go read your passage to respond that first question, and you do that with the second one and the third one and the fourth one as well. So to follow this strategy is possible, okay? It's possible, and it's also convenient because all questions are released following the chronological order of the passage, okay? I want you to understand that. In the actual test, when you are receiving your questions, the first, the second question, maybe the third one, are going to be about the first paragraph of your passage because, you know, in scientific passages or in scientific documents or texts, you're always going to have paragraphs, right? Paragraph 1, paragraph 2, paragraph 3, and so forth. So the questions are going to be respecting that order. They're going to respect the order, and the questions, whether they are 2, 1, or 3, are going to be about the first paragraph, later the second paragraph, later the third paragraph, and the fourth paragraph. And that is what helps very much to follow this strategy, because the first question, I'm sorry, I just have to connect my computer. All right, I'm sorry. So as I was saying, basically, what you are going to experience is that the first question or the first two are going to be about the first paragraph of your passage. The third question is going to be about the second paragraph. The fourth question is going to be about your third paragraph, and so on. Therefore, you are going to be able to respond orderly without having read the entire passage beforehand. Okay, so that's the way it's going to work. But you are able to follow every imaginable and your favorite, actually, a strategy that there is in order to approach. Okay, so just suggesting this one, but you can certainly follow the one that suits you the most. Okay, now we are going to look at the types of questions you will find in this section. Let's move on. The first type of question you are going to find is the vocabulary question. The TOEFL reading vocabulary questions are designed to test your knowledge of words or phrases that are commonly used in academic or non-academic contexts. Each vocabulary item consists of a sentence with one word or phrase highlighted. Okay, I'm going to show you an example of it. An example would be, it is difficult to get young people to plan for their old age, which seems very distant to them. As you can see, the word distant there is highlighted, right? It says distant and it's highlighted there with a line underneath. Okay, so as you can see, more or less a question would look like this. This type of question would look like this. It would be just a sentence with a word highlighted, and you are going to be requested to respond, what does that word mean in that specific sentence? The options in this case are impossible, far away, observable, or fearful. What does distant mean in this sentence? Okay, so maybe there is somebody who wants to respond. I'm going to read the question again. Okay, it is difficult to get young people to plan for their old age, which seems very distant to them. What does the word distant mean in that specific sentence? Cecilia, you have an idea?
Maybe be far away.
Right, you're actually right. The correct answer would be B, far away. Now, notice, nevertheless, that although you are right, it is very, very important for you to know that your response is right because you have interpreted the question following the context of the sentence. Because, you know, here, distant means obviously far away, right? That people, when they are young, think that they're old, I mean, their life as old people, as grown-ups is super, super far away. And that's why they are expressing that idea or that truth with distant here. Nevertheless, if you think about it, distant could also mean impossible in other contexts. Imagine that I say, for example, to be the president of the republic is very distant to me. In that case, in that specific case that I'm giving, distant would mean impossible, right? And not meaning far away, because I mean, I would be expressing that being the president of the republic, it's something impossible for me. I wouldn't be suggesting that it's far away as if that would eventually come up to me. I am actually suggesting that that is impossible. So what my recommendations are, always let the context be the transcendental source that gives each word's meaning, okay? Even if you think you know what the word could mean, remind that is the context what gives the transcendental source, that is the transcendental source that gives each word its meaning. You have to look at the context of this word in order to know what the word means. It's not just that you just know the word, it's what the word means in its context. That is what you have to follow. So read the word in its context to know its true meaning. Read the entire word, read the entire phrase in which this word is somehow inserted, and you are going to know what the meaning of this word is. Okay, so that is what I want you to know. Is it clear? Any question about this type of question? Any question about this? Okay, no questions. Okay, so moving on to the second type of question. The thoughtful reading purpose questions will test your ability to understand. Okay, so the type of question number 2 is the purpose question. Okay, so the thoughtful reading purpose questions will test your ability to understand why a certain idea or argument has been used in the text. Okay, they will ask you to draw conclusions about the information that has been stated in the passage. I'm going to repeat. They will ask you to draw conclusions about the information that has been stated in the passage. You need to locate the paragraph and read briefly to get the purpose. Okay, so they are going to ask you, what is the purpose of a particular portion in a paragraph, or what is the purpose of a particular paragraph? That is what they are going to ask. So let us look at an example. Okay, so on the right side of my screen, there is a paragraph. We're going to read it, and later we are going to try to respond to the purpose question. Okay, so let us read. If true, it says, though, why did cold-blooded animals such as snakes, lizards, turtles, and crocodiles survive the freezing winters and torrid summers? These animals are at the mercy of the climate to maintain a livable body temperature. It's hard to understand why they would not be affected, whereas dinosaurs were left too crippled to cope, especially if, as some scientists believe, dinosaurs were warm-blooded. Critics also point out that the shallow seaways had retreated from and advanced on the continents numerous times during the Mesozoic. So why did the dinosaurs survive the climatic changes associated with the earlier fluctuations, but not with this one? Although initially appealing, the hypothesis of a simple climatic change related to sea levels is insufficient to explain all the data. Okay, so that would be more or less a paragraph, similar to the ones you will receive in your actual TOEFL exam. So now the purpose question will go like, why does the author mention the survival of the snakes, lizards, turtles, and crocodiles in paragraph 3? Let's look at the possible answers. The first one would be to argue that dinosaurs may have become extinct because they were not cold-blooded animals. Number 2, to question the adequacy of the hypothesis that climatic change related to sea levels caused the extinction of the dinosaurs. I'm going to repeat, to question the adequacy of the hypothesis that climatic change related to sea levels caused the extinction of the dinosaurs. Number 3, to present examples of animals that could maintain a livable body temperature more easily than dinosaurs. Number 4, to support a hypothesis that these animals were not as sensitive to climate changes in the Cretaceous period as they are today. Okay, so let's look at my recommendations first before we come up with the right answer. To effectively respond to this type of question, you must ask, how does the alluded portion affect the whole text? How does the alluded portion affect the whole text? It might initiate, conclude, support, or discard something. Also, pay attention to the alluded portion's mode, very important. It could be interrogative, exclamative, it could be subjunctive, and so forth. And you know that the sentence mode or the portions mode is going to give you more or less a understanding, at least in general basis, about what type of purpose and what type of effect is the author trying to provoke through that specific portion. Okay, through the portions mode, you're going to know that. Okay, so following these recommendations, what is the right answer here? Well, the right answer would certainly be option number 2. Why? I mean, I'm gonna read first. The right option would be to question the adequacy of the hypothesis that climate change related to sea levels caused the extinction of the dinosaurs. To question the adequacy of the hypothesis that climate change related to sea levels caused the extinction of the dinosaurs. Why is this the right answer? Because remind that we are asked about why does the author mention the survival of the snakes, lizards, turtles, and crocodiles? If you read again, you're going to discover that he is reasoning, or he is trying to question why is it that these animals, turtles, lizards, crocodiles, etc., who are cold-blooded, that is to say that they depend very much on the climate in order to live, because they have to regulate their temperature and stuff like that. How is it that these animals who are so vulnerable did not die and got extinct through this climatic change, if dinosaurs who are warm-blooded, that is to say they do not need to regulate their blood temperature, did die because of this climate change, if they were actually more prepared to respond to this type of changes than all these animals who survived? That is what he's trying to argue or to suggest by implementing this specific portion. And you could actually begin to, you can actually begin to suppose that or to think that way when you look at the mode of the sentence, because if you look at it, it is interrogative. The sentence or the portion is in its interrogative mode. Therefore, when you have an interrogative mode, you are always trying to question something. You are saying, wait, why is this like this? Or you are trying to say, well, maybe this is not that way, right? When you are asking something. So by following my two recommendations, you can certainly respond correctly to this type of questions by asking, what does this alluded portion do in order to affect the whole text? And I explained that what this portion in our particular instance does, is to basically suggest that why these animals that are so vulnerable did not die because of this climate changes. If, for example, dinosaurs who were more powerful and more prepared did die. That is what the portion is provoking or affecting in the whole text, if you notice, okay? So is there any question about this specific type of question? No questions? Okay, awesome. So I'm gonna move on to the next question, okay? Moving on to the next question. TOEFL reading reference question. This is the third type of question for a reading section that you're going to find in the TOEFL exam. So in reference questions, you will be asked to respond, what does a specific word refer to in its context? I repeat, you will be asked to respond, what does a specific word refer to in its context? But nevertheless, it's not every single type of word. Here are highlighted words that you might be asked about. You could be asked about subject pronouns as it, they, object pronouns as it, them, demonstrative pronouns as these, those, this, that, possessive adjectives as its or their, and other reference words, okay? These are just reference words. The former, the later, one, once, another, older, and others, okay? So here's an example of how would this question look like. Let us read first of all the example here, and later we're going to respond, okay? So economic contact, it says on the right side of my screen, economic contact between Native Americans and Europeans can be traced back to the English and French fishermen off the coast of Canada in the 1500s. They traded guns and other weapons for beaver fur. The first explorers to trade with the Native Americans were Giovanni de Verrazzano and Jacques Cartier in the 1520s and the 1530s. In Verrazzano's book, he notes, if we wanted to trade with them for some of their things, they would come to the seashore on some rocks where the breakers were most violent while we remained on the little boat. And they sent us what they wanted to give on a rope and continually shutting us not to approach the land. Okay, so the question would be like, the word they in paragraph 3 refers to, and gives you some options. The first one would be English and French fishermen. Number 2, beavers. Number 3, Europeans. Number 4, traits and characteristics. Does somebody, okay, but before we ask what would be the right answer in that specific instance, let us look at my recommendations. As your word will be highlighted, as you can see here, the word that they are asking you for is highlighted, and this is how it will look like as well in the actual test. The word is always going to be highlighted. As you can see, I highlighted here with yellow because I have the rest of my letters highlighted with blue in order for you to read it more easily, but it is always going to be highlighted, okay? You must read 1 or 2 previous sentences to find the context and the reasoning train idea of the portion. I repeat, you must read one or two previous sentences to find the context. Again, context is everything. And the reasoning train, that is to say, the idea of the portion. Don't let yourself to be deceived by words effectively belonging to the paragraph. Your aim isn't to make connections among isolated words, but with an entire idea or reasoning train. I repeat, your aim isn't to make connections among isolated words, but with an entire idea or reasoning train. All right. So does somebody have an idea of what would be the right answer in this case? What does the word they mean in this specific example? Carlos, you have an idea?
I think the English and French fishermen.
Right, you're right. It's English and French fishermen. And now, why is your right? Why is your response right? Well, your response is right because if you notice, you have followed what the reasoning train is here. Because if you read the passage again, you're going to discover that what the question or what the passage is about is what were those first interactions between the Native American people and between the Europeans. And it says that there was a first group that were somehow, that was somehow trading with the native people. And that group was specifically the English and the French fishermen off the coast of Canada. And in that context, it comes the sentence. They, that is to say, the English and French fishermen, traded guns and other weapons for beaver fur, right? So that is why this answer is the correct one, because in the reasoning train and in the idea and in the context, what they are talking about is about these people in particular, English and French men. That is the reason, for example, it is not Europeans, right? Because if you see and if you look at the paragraph, Europeans is mentioned. And that's why I wanted to remark here that you should not be deceived by words that effectively belong to the paragraph, because many of the possible answers are going to be things that are mentioned in the passage. But not just because they are mentioned in the passage, it means that they are right or that these are the correct answers. If you look at the paragraph, actually, Europeans at this point is not really the reasoning train, it's not really the idea. Now it's in a specific group of Europeans, that is to say, the French fishermen and the English. So that is the reason why this is the correct answer, okay? And you should always try to do that, to read the context. As you can see, what I have done is just to read the context of this sentence. And you should definitely try to, as I said, to go and examine the context. And once you have seen the context, try to find that reasoning train, okay? And once you have found that reasoning train, you just have to choose the answer that obviously helps you to know what a specific character, what specific topic that word in specific is referring to, okay? Is there any question about this type of question? Please give me your questions, because it's very important for us to get everything clear. It's a very interesting question. Okay. I'm gonna move on then. As you can see, the TOEFL reading inference question is the question type number 4. Okay, the reading inference question. In TOEFL reading inference questions, you will be asked to reason and draw a rational inference that could be made out of a whole paragraph. I'm going to repeat. In TOEFL reading inference questions, you will be asked to reason and draw a rational inference that could be made out of a whole paragraph or a little portion. Now, do not forget that an inference is simply a conclusion or an assertion that could logically follow from a determined action, event, or circumstance. I will repeat that. Do not forget that an inference is simply a conclusion or assertion that could logically follow from a determined action, event, or circumstance. Okay, so let's look at an example. Practicing the inference questions. Let us read first of all the paragraph on the right side of my screen. It says, until the 1850s, Herman Melville primarily published novels, including Moby Dick, which would later become one of America's most famous and beloved novels. Okay? Now, his novels, however, had extremely low sales, and Melville had to quit writing novels because no publisher would agree to print his books. In an effort to make more money from his writing, Melville chose to publish some poetry instead. Poetry was extremely popular and sold well in 19th century America. So Melville expected to make a profit from his first book of poems. Okay? These poems, however, were as unpopular as his novels and sold scarcely any copies. All right. Now, before we get into the recommendations, I want to state something here that's super important, right? So pay attention. Imagine that you are somebody who knows a lot about Herman Melville. Imagine that you're a fan of Moby Dick's of Moby Dick's books, or imagine that you are a great fan of the movies that have been released about Moby Dick and everything behind that story. I mean, great. Imagine that you're a fan and somebody who's very well familiarized with this specific topic. If you are a person like that who has personal knowledge about a specific topic that is related to your paragraph or to your passage, you should never use that knowledge to respond any of the questions about the passage. Why? Because all these questions, as I said at the beginning, are not questions that are related or are trying to test how much do you know about these things outside of the class. These things are simply aimed to test how much do you comprehend, how much do you understand, how much can you learn from the material you receive in this academic environment. Okay, so even if you know something about Melville, even if you know something about everything that we have read about the extinction of the dinosaurs, for example, maybe you're a Jurassic Park fan or something like that, I mean, great, that's awesome. Nevertheless, for responding these questions, you should never use your personal information, the things that you know about the topic, never use them. Even if you know that you are correct and maybe the topic suggests something wrong here, doesn't matter. You have to respond according to what it is stated in the passage, okay? So having said that, let's move to the recommendations for inference questions. Okay, Anna, but we are going to read how the question would be first. Which of the following can be inferred about Melville's poetry? This is how the structure, how would this question be formulated in the actual test? Which of the following can be inferred about Melville's poetry? Option A, it was not as well written as Melville's novels. Option B, it was written primarily in iambic pentameter. C, it did not yield a significant profit for Melville. Number D, or excuse me, option D, it was Melville's only possible way of making money. All right. Now, let's look at the recommendations. Don't forget that although you are asked to infer something, this doesn't mean you can separate yourself from the passage and let your imagination to fly. You must infer, yes, but you must do it only with the information provided in the passage. Very important, as I said. You must infer, but you must do it with the information provided in the passage, okay? Not the information that you have by yourself on your own. Second recommendation, even if one option is a logically valid inference, let only the passage and its information to guide you. I repeat, even if one option is a logically valid inference, let only the passage and its information to guide you. If you know something about the topic, not even that should be a parameter for you to infer. So I'm going to explain this a little bit more. For example, let's look at the option B. It was written primarily in iambic pentameter. Okay, so this inference about Melville's poetry, it's certainly possible. I mean, if we want to infer something, we could certainly infer that. It's possible. Nevertheless, this is a wrong answer. Why? Because although certainly you could infer this is possible, maybe really it turns out that Melville did rewrite all his poetry in iambic pentameter, maybe this is right, but even if it is right, it is not the right answer. Why? Because in any single part of the paragraph, there is something that suggests you that that is the case. Do you understand that? There is any single part on the paragraph that suggests you that that is the case. Certainly, it is possible. You could infer that. Nevertheless, nothing in the passage itself suggests you that that is the case. All right, so that is a wrong answer. And the same is, for example, for option D. It was Melville's only possible way of making money. Maybe it was. Maybe it was Melville's only possible way of making money. Nevertheless, you cannot say that that is the right answer because the paragraph in the passage does not suggest you that. They don't. I mean, the passage does not suggest anything like that. Okay, but certainly it's possible. So what is the right answer? The right answer is the option C. It did not yield a significant profit for Melville. Well, can you infer that? Because if you look at the paragraph, let's read together. It says, his novels had extremely low sales, and Melville had to quit writing novels because no publisher would agree to print his books. And look at this. In an effort to make more money from his writing, Melville chose to publish some poetry instead. It is saying here that when he was writing novels, he had to quit writing novels because it didn't give him any kind of profitable result. He was not receiving money through that type of art, through that type of writing. So he had, and why was that? Because nobody wanted to purchase his books. His books or his novels had very low sales. That is what it said. That is what the paragraph said. Now, if you move on, it says that Melville chose to do what? To publish some poetry instead. But nevertheless, these poems, and if you look at the last sentence of the paragraph, however, were as unpopular as his novels and sold scarcely any copies. This means that his poetry, although it was intended for him to receive money, it didn't really give him any kind of profitable result or profitable effect, because they also had, that is to say, his poetry didn't have sales. Nobody purchased as well his poetry. Therefore, his poetry did not yield a significant profit for Melville. That is something that you can infer from the paragraph because it suggests you that because his novels were not well sold, nobody purchased them. He didn't have enough money as a product of that type of art. He had to move on to write poetry. And in his poetry, it turned out that nobody also wanted to purchase his poetry. Therefore, what is the conclusion? What is what you can infer? That it didn't have any significant profit for Melville. That is what you can infer about the paragraph. So as you can see, you have to infer only things that the paragraph suggests you, only things that the paragraph can certainly give you as a possible and as a thing that you can certainly conclude. Okay, so let us examine, for example, option A. It was not as well written as Melville's novels, it says there. Nevertheless, yes, it was not as well written as Melville's novels. It is possible. I mean, maybe you are a fan of Herman Melville and you can actually assent with this specific option. Maybe you can assert that indeed his poetry was not as well written as his novels, but that is certainly something that you could not infer just from the paragraph. You can imagine it, but you cannot infer it from the paragraph because the paragraph does not suggest that. Okay, is there any question about this type of question? Because this is a more difficult exercise. Is there any question? Please, your questions. All right, no questions, I guess. Okay, so we are going to move on. Okay, no, actually, okay, so we're gonna look at this one as well. Okay, so time for reading essential information question. In this type of question, you will be asked to convey the same information than a given portion by using different words. I repeat, the essential information question, that is the fifth type of questions you are going to find in this section, is basically going to request you to convey the same information than a given portion by using different words. It's important for you to remind that the correct answer must convey all the information given in the allotted portion, not just some. That is super important. The correct answer in this case is going to convey all the information given in the allotted portion, not just some. Let's look to an example, okay? All right, so the end of the Indian trade began with the Indian Removal Act of 1830, forcing tribes such as the Cherokee and the Choctaw, I'm not sure how to pronounce that, to leave their homelands, okay? When Native Americans resisted relocation, conflicts occurred, such as the Second Seminole War, which caused the death of 3,000 Native Americans. They were forced to relocate to and adjust to reservation life. So this is the important part, okay? Between industrialization, the reduced population of Native Americans, and the segregation of them into the reservations contributed to the end of Indian trade. I'm going to repeat that because this is what you are requested to explain or to convey using other words, so pay attention. Between industrialization, it says here, the reduced population of Native Americans and the segregation of them into the reservations contributed to what? To the end of Indian trade. Now, the question will be something like this. The sentence in paragraph 6, between industrialization, the reduced population of Native Americans, okay, and the segregation of them into the reservations contributed to the end of Indian trade is most similar to. And you have to choose one option that conveys all the same information than that specific portion that is highlighted with yellow and that will be highlighted on the actual test. You have to somehow express the same information using other words, and you're going to have options. So you have to choose the option that expresses and conveys all that information. Remind, all the information, not leaving a single part out of the statement, all that information appropriately. Okay, so let us read the answers, or the possible answers. The first one will be Indian trade came to an end because of segregation, industrialization, and declining populations. Number 2 would be the United States industrialized their production, segregated from the Native Americans, and entered conflicts that decreased the Native American population. Number 3 would be Native Americans did not wish to follow industrialization and segregated into the reservation. Native Americans wish to follow industrialization and segregated into the reservation. Okay, so those are the options. My recommendations. Remember that all options in this question type will probably convey accurate information. Therefore, do not let yourself to be convinced too quickly. The correct answer will not omit any information of the portion, nor will it pay too much attention to a single element and misrepresenting the others. You can certainly read the immediate context of your requested portion, but it will be more convenient if you remit to examine only the sentence or portion you want to respond about, that is to say, the one that is highlighted. This way, you won't be confused by additional and relevant details. Okay, so what would the correct answer be here? It would be certainly the first one, that is to say, Indian trade came to an end because of segregation, industrialization, and declining populations. Okay, this is the correct answer because if you look at the highlighted sentence, this response basically conveys and expresses all the information down in the highlighted sentence. All the other responses basically confuse the information, or they pay attention too much to some elements of the sentence or the portion, but they basically pass by some of the elements on that, or excuse me, to be found in that specific sentence. Okay, so the correct answer that expresses and conveys all that information would be the first one, that is to say, Indian trade came to an end because of segregation, industrialization, and declining population. Any question? Is there any question? No questions? Okay, no questions then. Okay, so I want you guys to now, oh, you have a question, Daniela, please.
Yes, sorry. So the correct answer will
Mhm.
include all the points in the paragraph, in the sentence.
Right, exactly. That is exactly what I mean. The correct answer, as you can see in this case, is this one because it conveys every single element of the sentence. It mentions industrialization, it mentions the segregation of them into reservations, and it also mentions the reduced population of the Native Americans. And all these things basically provoked the declining, excuse me, it provoked the end of the Indian trade. And that is what this option, the first one, it's highlighting, right, or it's conveying, it's the same information. Now it's not passing by any single element, and it's paying attention to everything very accurately and appropriately.
Teacher, one question, please.
Yeah, for sure.
Even if the answer has all the points, it doesn't have to have like more additional information, right?
Exactly. If it also adds information that is not part of the sentence or the portion that you have highlighted, that is also a wrong answer, because remind that what you have to look for in a correct answer is an answer that conveys or that will somehow contains all the elements on the portion, but nevertheless nothing outside of it. If it inserts some extra information that is not to be found on your specific portion, is not the correct answer. You want everything, but not something less nor something more. Is that clear?
Yes, thank you.
Awesome. All right. So now, before we begin, I am going to send you the poll that is traditional, as I said. The poll, it's something that we are going to be practicing in every single class, and please respond honestly and with all your considerations, because this is anonymous, and also certainly I know that I can improve, and we can continually improve. So please respond to the poll honestly, as you consider is correct. Okay. So now I'm going to be looking at the assistance. Let me see. All right. I think that awesome. Awesome. Okay. Yeah, I think that everybody has honors. Okay. Awesome. Perfect. So end the poll. Yes. Okay. Awesome. So that's it. So that's all for today's class. I'm looking at the people who have been present today. Okay, awesome. So that's all. Is there any final commentary or question?
Teacher, what happened if I can access, to the class tomorrow?
If you can what? I'm sorry.
Enter to the class tomorrow.
Oh well, you will certainly have an absence that is going to be registered, but well, you're just going to lose for sure the practical exercises, right? But you're just you're not going to suffer any type of sanction until this point, because it would be just your first absence, right? But if you accumulate, I think 3 or 4 or 5 absences, then that is going to be a little bit well, that is going to have some effects, but you have to call and get in touch with Ruth in order to know what is your limit for absences. But nevertheless, if it is one class, it's okay, right? And even if it is for a reason of of major importance, I think it's certainly permissible. All right. So is there any other question or commentary? No question or commentary? All right. So given that
yes, I have a question.
Oh yeah.
If I wanna read again this, where can I
Carolina.
find the material?
I'm sorry, I didn't listen to you. Could you repeat?
Where can I find this material? if
Oh,
I want to
you mean
read.
the slides. Oh, sure. I can send them to the group. Don't worry. I will do that.
Okay.
Okay, awesome. Okay, so that's it then. If there's no other question or commentary, all right, awesome. So have a great night, and as you know, next class with me is going to be on Thursday, and we're going to finish to see all the possible type of questions that we're going to receive. And please practice a lot, and continue with that with that desire you have to get a very good score in this specific test. Okay, so thank you very much for your participation.
Thank you, teacher.
Thank you, teacher.
Thank you, teacher.
Bye.
Good
For
night.
sure. See ya. Good night. See ya.
Bye-bye.